Hey, what's up? It's Mike, and this is Reckless Palate, where I give you the tools to find the confidence to cook creatively and spontaneously in your kitchen at home. All right, today we're doing the third installment of my favorite ingredient of all time, my number one ingredient ever, which is salt. And we've talked about so far, salt gives life, salt takes life, and salt changes life and ingredients. We changed an ingredient, which was the gluten in bread dough. That was delicious bread. We took life, which was removing moisture from tomatoes, when actually we just used that moisture as a delicious sauce in a tomato salad. We didn't really take any life there, but it's the same premise. And thirdly, today we're ending up back at the beginning, which is where salt gives life. And because salt gives life, we find it to be delicious. We crave it because it's part of what's essential for life on Earth and for human life. So when we make food and we add salt to it, it tastes extra good because we need that salt to survive. So today we're going to make celery root puree. This is celery root. It's ugly as sin, but we're going to cut the ugly part off and cut it up into pieces and cook it. The only thing that's going into this puree is celery root and salt and a little bit of water to kind of loosen it up if we need to, plus cooking it. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt to the water that we cook this in, and then when we're done cooking it, I'm going to add more salt to taste. Everybody's favorite term that's like, huh? So, salting to taste is something that we are going to do today, where we literally salt and then taste. And we say, is that enough salt? So I'll go over that when we do the seasoning after cooking. But for right now, what we're going to do is I'm going to cut up this celery root. We're going to put a little salt in the water and we're going to cook it. So when you hear somebody say salt to taste, which how many times have you heard that? Steak, salt and pepper to taste. I guess that kind of means something. So, I guess it kind of means something because different people have different tastes as far as like how much salt and pepper tastes good. But in fact, when I hear the term salt to taste, I think of it as salting and then tasting and determining if it's enough salt, which you can't do that with a steak or chicken. I mean, you can, but you're going to be hurting afterwards. It's not good. So how do you do that? Well, there are certain times when you can salt to taste with meat. Adrian and I make sausage sometimes, breakfast sausage, and we season that to taste. And the way we do it is we take a little bit of the ground sausage that's got the spices mixed into it, and we cook it. We cook a little teeny tester sausage patty, and then we taste it to see if there's enough. And if there isn't, we adjust the seasoning. Well, that's seasoning to taste, okay? What are you going to do? Like salt your steak and then cook it medium rare? You better cook it medium rare. No, just kidding, whatever you like. But, you're going to salt your steak and then cook it and then say, does this taste right? No. Let me salt it again and cook it again. No. And, although you can add salt to a steak after the fact, which I do usually, but I do it with finishing salt to get that like crispy, crunchy pop of salty goodness. Cooking a steak without salt and then putting salt on afterward doesn't have the same effect. Okay, so this is a video on vegetables, not meat, right? So really it's a video on salt. You probably saw me peeling these celery roots, and I didn't talk a lot about it, but they're covered in dirt, like many vegetables are, because that's where they grow, okay? They're covered in dirt, but that's fine. You don't have to like wash them. You're cutting the dirt off. Who cares, right? Plus, you're going to boil it, so it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to cut these up, and the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to cut it in half, lay the flat side down, cut that in half the long way again, and then just kind of make little chunks out of it, okay? We don't have to be too precise about this. I just want the pieces to be, 1 to 2 inches in any direction because I want them to cook a little bit faster. I could just put this whole hunk in there if I want, but take forever to cook. Celery is not really known as a very exciting vegetable, right? It's celery. Like, what do? Put peanut butter on it and eat it, and it's all stringy and gets in between your teeth, and then you gotta floss, and not fun. But actually, celery is amazing. I recently made soup, and I didn't realize it when I was making the soup, but the recipe didn't call for celery. Usually soup has like onions, carrots, and celery, but it only called for onions and carrots. And after I made the soup, I was adjusting the seasoning, and I kept thinking, something's missing here. But I just couldn't place it, and I kind of went, oh, well, I don't know what it is. Then a lady on a Facebook group that I belong to said something about soup in a comment to someone else who was asking about what to put in her soup, and she said celery. Always put celery. And I went, yeah, always put celery. Why doesn't this have celery in it? So I grabbed... we have celery salt, which, when do you use celery salt? Like never. But I put a little dash in the soup, and it was like, bing, amazing. Like, that's what soup should taste like. So celery, it's like a fundamental flavor in lots of food that we eat. So I'm going to cook this celery. I got a pot going over here. So I'm going to add my celery root to that water, and it's going to bubble over like mad. I'm just going to put the lid on it there, and we're going to give it time to come up to a rolling boil, at which point I'll take the lid off and let it cook uncovered so I can kind of keep an eye on it. But I like to put the lid on just to get the boil rolling. It boils faster. So if you don't want to put a lid on your pot when you're bringing it to a boil, that's fine. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So as long as you got the time, it's all good. All right, we'll be back in a little bit. We'll check on this celery root to see how it's going. Oh, I almost forgot something, didn't I? Ha, I was testing you. Okay, so probably should have added this before I put the celery in, but it's definitely not too late. Okay, so, okay, we're good. No. This is a pot of water, guys. If it was a pot of soup, would you do this? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you would. Maybe you don't know. I didn't know before I went to culinary school. I never would have known. I was like, says, salt the water. Okay, like that's good, right? No, it is not. Especially not with pasta. But this free kosher salt guide that I've created will help you figure out how much salt to add to cooking water for vegetables and pasta and things like that. So download it, recklesspalate.com/salt. In the meantime, I have an idea of how much salt it's going to take. It's going to take about this much here, okay? So that's probably 1.5 tablespoons-ish, okay? In what's probably like 4-6 cups of water or something like that. So not a real precision thing, but good enough. All right, so we'll come back in a few. We'll check on that, see how it's doing. Okay, we're back, and we're going to check out this celery root and see how it's doing. When I pick this up with a fork, it should either break in half or fall right off the fork just like that. So any of these pieces in there, they're either breaking or they're just falling right off. And that is how tender it needs to be. If you feel resistance putting the fork in, or if you pick it up and it just hangs there on the fork and you have to kind of like shake it off, then it's not done. I took a class once from an instructor who was teaching us how to make some kind of a coulis, which is like a real smooth, silky sauce made out of fruit. Usually, it's like a puree, except it's like silky smooth, real fine texture. And he says, the secret is to cook the hell out of it. And so I've always kind of taken that into account. I don't want to overcook this. I don't want it to just like fall apart in the pot because it's going to lose nutritional value and flavor that way. We only want to cook it as much as it needs to be cooked. That being said, it needs to be pretty cooked. So I'm going to grab a strainer here. I'm going to bring this over. I'm going to drain it in the sink. Okay, now that I've drained my celery root, I'm going to put it back in the hot pot, okay? And the reason for doing that is the hot pot is going to cause steam to continue to escape from this. It's going to dry it out, okay? Because what we want right now is for it to get dry. So I'm just going to shake this a little bit. I do this with mashed potatoes too. You don't want them to be all wet and soggy. You want them to be dry. And you can see I'll bring this around. As I start to shake this, it starts to get kind of mushy and mealy, and pieces, little like paste kind of starts to form and stick to the sides of the pan. That's okay. Okay. We're just going to shake it and let that steam escape just like that. Okay, so I'm going to shake that a little bit more. Just let some steam come off here, okay? All right. Now, potato masher? Sure, whatever. Potato masher works great for stuff like this. You can also use a whisk. That works really well. Sometimes I like to start with the potato masher just to kind of break it up a little bit. You're just breaking it up as much as you can, and then a whisk will actually help whip it into more smooth puree. So I'm probably going to go to that next. So here is my mashed but not quite pureed celery root. I'm just going to continue with the whisk here. I got a few different whisks, but I like this rigid whisk to really like break this up and stand up to the texture of these of this celery root. So I'm just gonna whip this a little bit. You can use a blender. I don't care what you do, you know. But the real trick to this, and to doing it with potatoes as well, particularly with potatoes because they're so starchy, okay, is you are trying to make a smooth texture before you add any fat, okay? So like if you're making mashed potatoes, most people add like milk and or cream and or butter to the mashed potatoes, which makes it delicious. But the trick is if you add that stuff before or while you're whipping it, pureeing it, whatever, it makes it lumpy. Okay, if your mashed potatoes are lumpy, if you didn't whip them smooth before you added the liquid and you didn't shake them dry and cook them long enough, then try that. And let me know if your mashed potatoes come out better when you do that, okay? Once they're good and smooth, which this is getting there, you know, it's still a little bit mealy. If I were like being super pro about it, I would use like a food mill or a potato ricer where it like shoves it through holes it's like a garlic press, right? Except it's giant. That's a potato ricer. It's like a giant garlic press for potatoes. But okay, this is not about how smooth my celery root puree is today, okay? This is about, does my celery root puree taste like delicious celery root, okay? Which I think we're kind of at a good place here. I'll show you this. Okay, so this is where I'm at with the celery root right now, okay? As you can see, It's not 100% lump free, you know, we've still got some lumpiness in here, but it's pretty well pureed. It's pretty pasty. So we're just going to go with that, okay? And we're going to taste it and we're going to season it. Okay, so I got a couple of spoons here. You use one spoon for dipping and the other spoon, whoops, for tasting, okay? So it's kind of ho-hum, and that's the point. If you just mash up celery puree, it kind of tastes like baby food, okay? What we're going to do now is we're going to add salt. And, you know, if I were making this for dinner, I'd probably also add like little vegetable stock or chicken stock if you don't want it to be vegetarian, you know, butter, things like that. Okay, it'll make it a little richer and give it a little more of a texture, okay? But I'm not worried about that right now. All I'm doing is demonstrating how this celery puree that is moderately bland right now, you know, just tastes kind of like, I don't know, lackluster, you know? I mean, it has a celery flavor to it, but when I take a stalk of celery and I slice a little piece and I eat it, it has a lot of flavor. This is, you know, what we're going to do here is I'm going to add some salt. This is a good place to check out my kosher salt guide. It'll tell you about how much salt you want to start with, or kind of a baseline, okay? If you have a scale, you can take this, put a bowl on the scale, hit tare so it says 0, put the celery root in there. It'll tell you how much. Look at the kosher salt guide. It says 1.5 teaspoons per pound. I don't know. I'm pulling that out of thin air. I don't have it in front of me. But so you say, okay, 1.5 teaspoons a pound. This is 3/4 of a pound. You don't have to be super precise. Start with a teaspoon, okay? You can always add more. That's probably about half a teaspoon. So I'll do 2 of those, okay? Just going to mix it right in here to my puree. All right, there. Now I taste it, right? Wrong. Wait a minute. Or mix for a minute. If you do this over a low burner, it'll keep it warm so that, you know, while you're stirring and adjusting the seasoning, it doesn't like end up on somebody's plate and they're like, oh, great, that's like lukewarm, gross. But you also don't want to forget about it because then it'll like scorch on the bottom or end up getting super dry. So keep a little bit of water nearby, and you can just add a splash of water now and then to kind of revamp it. All right, so that's been quite long enough. I'm going to do my little taste again. Okay, so now what I've got is, it doesn't taste salty, okay? It tastes more like celery or celery root, you know? I mean, celery root kind of tastes, it's like celery flavored potato-ish. When you're seasoning to taste, particularly with salt, you aren't waiting for the food to taste salty. You're waiting for the food to taste like what it tastes like. When I first tasted this, it was kind of like styrofoam, cardboardy, like not a whole lot going on. Now it's all of a sudden like, I'm not like, oh, salty junk. Like, now I'm like, oh, like, it actually tastes like nice celery root puree. And that's the whole goal. I seem to have got it right the first time. I don't think I need to add any more salt to this at all. It may continue to absorb the salt a little bit because I haven't waited quite that long. But, yeah, it's really good. If I had other things to do before I served it, I would probably taste it one last time before I served it to make sure that it hasn't like absorbed the salt to the point where it needs a little bit more. This is money right here. This celery root puree just went from being like something I would not be stoked to have on my plate and be kind of like pushing around like a kid, like, I want this celery puree, to like, can I have more? Is there more of this? Because it's just like, it's just celery root, man. Like, we cooked celery root in water with a little bit of salt, and then we add a little more salt to it. Like, this is amazing. There's zero fat in it. There's zero added sugar in it, you know. There's no dairy. There's no anything, you know. It's celery root with a little bit of salt in it. So that's kind of the point of this video, is salt can turn average ingredients into a delicious dish just on its own. Now, if you want to get extravagant, add a few other little things to it, like butter or stock or some herb or something like that. Like, great, go for it, you know. Just try not to convolute it. This is delicious in and of itself. Like, it shines. I mean, you saw those things, they're ugly. And without salt, it was like super ho-hum. You know, I don't need to add much to this to make it just a little bit better, elevate it just a little bit. I might add a little bit of like white pepper. It isn't necessarily because of the flavor, which it does have a slightly different flavor than black pepper, almost like a barnyard flavor. Smell it sometime, you'll be like, it smells like the fair. But the reason I use white pepper in something like this is because it's white. And if you put black pepper in it, people are going to be like, are there ants in this? I don't use black pepper for mashed potatoes or light purees or eggs, you know, things like that. I use white pepper because it kind of disappears into it a little more, but it has a similar effect of black pepper, giving it just a little something, just a little something. And white pepper's really potent, so be very careful with it or it's going to taste like sheep. Oh, here's one thing before I go. If I were going to do this, and I challenge you to do this, in fact, if you want to do this experiment, get some carrots or parsnips or rutabaga or some kind of like root vegetable like this, and you can make a puree out of it. And if you are salting it at this point and you're like, like it's okay, but I'm not exactly sure that this is enough salt, but I'm afraid to add more salt because what if it ends up tasting just like salty? Okay, so you don't want to salt this to the point where it's going to burn people's mouths and they're going to be like, this is great. You know, here, Rover, put a little bit in a cup like this. And then you can add just a little. This is the point where you add just a little teeny pinch of salt like that, okay? Because it's just a little bit of food. Just add a little bit of salt. And now, if I've salted it too much, which I have, tastes like, it's like chow mein, which if you haven't noticed, a big flavor component of chow mein is celery. And that's what this tastes like. It's like celery with soy sauce. It's that salty. You ever pour a bunch of soy sauce on your chow mein? I know somebody in this household who loves to put soy sauce all over their Chinese food. No judgment, just saying. That's what this tastes like. It tastes like chow mein that has soy sauce poured all over it. It's super salty. So now I know that's too much salt. But I also know what it tasted like before this. So if you do little increments of salt and taste it, you can say, okay, that tastes better. And then you can add a little more salt and say, that's not better, that's worse. So now you have a good feel for what it's going to taste like when the salt is right. So when you go back to your main batch, if you do need to add more salt to it, you know how far you need to go. And you can just add salt in little tiny increments, stir it up, taste it, and say, okay, all right, that's the flavor I remember. That was when it was at its like peak flavor enhancement, right? Without tasting salty. This tastes salty. This here, goodbye. Like, who cares? It's a teaspoon, you know? Who cares? I've still got my whole batch, didn't ruin it, but I was able to experiment with the salt level, find just the right taste, and I was able to salt to taste. If you use this technique on something, if you salt something to taste, if you're tasting it and adding salt and it improves the dish for you, or you end up ruining it, or you use this trick, and figure out, hey, like, I never knew I could make this taste this way until I added the right amount of salt, leave a comment for me and let me know. I'm really intrigued to find out if this helps you, because if this doesn't help anyone, then here I am just like chatting away to a camera, you know, for funsies. I want to know, does this help? You know, is there something else that you want to know about that is related to this or unrelated to this, but related to cooking or wine, as you saw? If you watched my last couple videos, you know I'm into wine. Let me know. Leave a comment. And don't forget to check out my free kosher salt guide, www.recklesspalate.com/salt. All right, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed my video series on salt, and we'll see you next time for another cool video. Until then, cook reckless, y'all.